Sorry. Thank you, Matthew. All right. I just want to say good morning, everyone. On behalf of STAO, the Ontario Council for Technology of Education, ACSE, and the Governmental Ministry of Education, we welcome you to our webinar, which we will be focused on sharing resources for the junior level that are adapted to the new 2022 Science and Technology curriculum.
So I will be doing the land acknowledgement. It is important for us to acknowledge the original settlers and caretakers of this land as we take steps towards reconciliation with the Indigenous peoples of Canada. As Canadians, we are all treaty people, and it is important for us to recognize that we live, work, and play on the land of people who were here prior to colonization. We also need to recognize the important contributions of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples to the field of science as a whole, and to recognize the benefits of incorporating diverse perspectives into our classrooms. Creating spaces where our students are able to see the contributions of local Indigenous communities allows our Indigenous students to feel represented and also helps our non-Indigenous students gain a better understanding of Indigenous science and traditional knowledge. As we continue down the path of reconciliation, this will help us all to create more inclusive science environments where a variety of perspectives are welcomed and contribute to how we see the world.
So today we have the 6 of us as presenters. My name is Gail Mills, and I'm from the Renfrew County District School Board, where I teach STEM to immersion classes this year.
Hello, I'm Ian Ducharme. I'm the STEM lead for my board, the Conseil Scolaire Viamonde in the Greater Toronto and region.
Hi, my name is Neelu Singh. I work with a private school in Ontario, and this year I'm teaching grade 4, and I enjoy teaching science in my classroom.
Good evening, I'm Francesca Flood. I am an elementary STEAM itinerant with the Halton Catholic District School Board.
Hi, everyone. My name is Manpreet. I am currently a grade 4 teacher working with the Peel District School Board.
And hello, everyone. I am Tanya Crookmo with the Rainy River District School Board, and I'm very excited for all of you to be here today. I would just like to welcome you, and I thank you for spending your time with us today. I know how precious time is, and so with that said, we will share our agenda. Now, we are committed to staying within our 1 hour time frame. We'll stay well within that time frame, but we're also committed to making sure that you walk away with some tools that will give you more confidence and feel more prepared to implement the new science curriculum. So for today, we're going to give you a brief overview of the revised science and technology curriculum. And in particular, we're going to pay attention to how Strand A connects to all of the other strands. And primarily, we're going to spend most of our time looking at some of the resources that have been developed to help you implement the new curriculum. So we're going to take a look at some long-range plans and some curriculum support resources. Now, both of those are available at the website that was already mentioned, and it's also in the chat. That is scitechontario.ca. So we'll mention that throughout the presentation so that you don't forget. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. But again, as was already mentioned, somebody will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So feel free to ask your questions whenever they come up. And then we'll have some next steps and some ideas for follow-up. And at the end, we'll kindly ask you to complete a very short survey so that we can learn from what you have learned. We have 3 main learning goals for this webinar. And again, they kind of both relate, or all 3 of them relate to those 2 resources that have been developed. The first being the long-range plans. We want you to understand how they're structured, and we want you to understand that there are 2 different long-range plans that you can choose from. And with those long-range plans, we want you to understand how they connect to the revised science curriculum and how they connect to the curriculum resources, which are going to be available at the end of this month. So the curriculum resources are something that we're going to highlight today. We're going to share some different examples of activities from all three grades, all three junior grades, grades 4, 5, and 6, so that you'll have sort of a concrete understanding of how Strand A can be integrated into the other strands in the curriculum. And that's really where we're going to spend a lot of our time today, is kind of trying to inspire you and give you some insight into how Strand A can be integrated across the other strands.
Okay, so we're going to kick things off with our very first poll question for everybody. And that poll question is going to be, how familiar are you with STEM on a scale of 1 to 5? So 1, not at all familiar, and 5, very familiar. So we'll give everybody about 15 to 20 seconds to kind of submit your response. And then we'll take a look and see where everyone is at. The poll question should come up on your screen right away, and you should see it from there. Okay, awesome. All right, so it looks like we have quite a variety of with us tonight, and so it seems like we've got some that are very familiar and some friends who are definitely hanging out in the middle, and I can relate to those friends as well, hanging out in the middle. And we also have those friends that are not familiar at all, which is really great because we're going to talk a lot about Strand A and those STEM connections. So that's wonderful. So as we begin, let's take a look at some of those key changes that exist in the new 2022 curriculum. So here in this slide, you'll see the difference between the two. And just to make things super obvious, we've highlighted in yellow the new and updated changes. So we know that Strand A, STEM Skills and Connections, is the new and improved strand. And this strand is quite unique and from the others, and you're going to see why. So when we're looking at some of those key changes, you may notice that some things are actually quite familiar and transfer over from the 2007 document. For instance, the scientific research process, the scientific inquiry and experimentation process, those existed in the previous document. Now we are looking at it again, but this time it's being removed and sort of plucked from the other strands and housed in Strand A. But the new process, the new rebranded process, as we say, is the engineer's design process, which we'll get into a little bit in a little bit. But the brand new piece that's being introduced in this document is the coding and emerging technologies. And you'll see for the junior grades, it is just those two expectations, focusing on input, storage, processing, and output. And for grades, and then as well, the other piece is the impact of emerging technology and coding on everyday life, including skilled trades. And you'll also notice in Strand A, as we look at the applications, connections, and contributions, that we are introduced. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, but the other, when we take a look, we can really see how this strand really focuses and highlights students' pathways and puts a big focus on real world problems and solving those real world problems and highlighting the contributions that we have made in science and technology as well. It's important to remember this isn't just a science document, it is a science and technology document as well. And I encourage everybody as well, the key changes are on the ministry site. So we'll share those with you in the chat and you can see more, like here are your overall sort of themes or units or strands, if you will, that I have on here on this slide. But I encourage you to take a look at the specific expectations to your grade. Not too many changes in strands B to E, but just some updates for sure. So you'll want to take a look at those. But you'll notice that some of the headings and topics from the 2007 to the 2022 version are a little bit different. So for example, the pulleys and gears is was what we formerly called it in grade 4, but now we're calling it machines and their mechanisms. And so, like I had sort of mentioned before, and I'll reiterate again, is you'll notice that some of those pieces and those expectations have been pulled from strands B to E and then housed in Strand A. And the idea is that Strand A is going to be taught throughout. So as we move forward with this document, the key thing to keep in mind, though, is the ability to integrate the strands and to make those curriculum connections throughout your programming. And my peers in this webinar will definitely go through examples with you on how to do that. And the column on the far right highlights the content and topics throughout the entire document. And there are many opportunities in those areas that could cover curriculum topics in health, language, social studies, mathematics, and even the arts. And the new document really, like I mentioned before, it really adds a spotlight to students' pathways within science and technology, including the skilled trades. It also focuses beyond the content but how the explored topics really address those real world problems and how various communities have contributed to those advancements and understandings that we have within science and technology. So the goal, again, and we're going to hear this all night long, is to integrate those subjects and those strands wherever possible. And this visual you'll see here on the left-hand side of your screen shows us why Strand A is so unique and so flexible. So Strand A is intended to be covered throughout the other strands and to give, and that's there on purpose, to give those topics in strands B to E life and meaning for our students. The 3 processes we discussed earlier fit so well within the other strands, and you can see how those elements in Strand A can work themselves quite easily in the other strands. And my partners will, like I mentioned, will provide many wonderful examples later on the webinar. And then that visual on the right is, as I mentioned earlier, the engineer's design process. That is the new, that process might actually look quite familiar, and it was probably named something different in the 2007 document, but now when we look at it and when we're doing those hands-on tasks with our students, you'll want to refer them to this image and how it operates in a cycle as they prototype, experiment, research the topics that you're going to explore together in your classes.
Continuing from where Francesca left, the new science curriculum is designed to prepare students for deeper levels of science technology learning as they move into secondary school and beyond. The revised science and technology curriculum includes 3 main goals: developing critical skills through scientific and technological investigations, exploring science and technological concepts with a focus on practical connection to a student's life and community, considering the bigger picture by making connections between science and technology and the changing world. The inclusion of Strand A is the most significant change to the science and technology curriculum. The strands need to be embedded throughout the year in an ongoing manner. In the upcoming slides, we will cover in detail. All my friends here, they're going to focus a lot about LRPs and how we can move forward from there.
Okay, so the long range plans can be found on the SciTech Ontario website. When you first arrive at the SciTech Ontario website and you choose long range plans, you choose your grade, and you will initially see a Start Here button as is shown on the screen. This takes you to a PDF which describes how to plan your science class. The brief section called How to Foster Inquiry in STEM was central to the elaboration of the long range plans, and that's also in there as well. The overview provides teachers with the reasoning behind and the difference between the structure adopted in long range plan model 1 and model 2. And we're going to get into that a little deeper now. So if you need to go to the source, you can find it, scitechontario.ca. So the long range plans were designed with 2 models. Model 1 has all 5 strands spiraled into big ideas and guiding questions for each term. Model 2 has 2 strands plus Strand A, the STEM strand, for each term, with big ideas and guiding questions for each strand. The long range plans were also designed to consider seasons and outdoor activities that work with each strand as well. The resource activities are essentially the same for both model A and B, or model 1 and 2, as you will see when we go through some activities. So choosing a model is actually up to you, up to your classroom and your situation. And it's a good idea to look through both to see which one suits your classroom and your own teaching style. So when you enter the long range plans, say in Model 1, for example, the first section is called Big Ideas and Guiding Questions for an Inquiry Stance. Guiding Questions is also a section in Model 2. The second section is the STEM Skills and Connections section. That's found in both Models 1 and 2 and includes an extensive list of activities for all aspects of STEM investigation and communication skills, coding, applications, connections, contributions. Not all the activities mentioned need to be completed. That's really important to note. There is an extensive list. So teachers should choose from the list the activities that best suit the teacher's resources, class, and interests. Both models also include a list of Strand expectations that are covered each month or suggested timeline so that teachers can easily see what's being covered. The other sections included in both models are cross-curricular connections, resources, and first and next steps. This will help teachers prepare for units and extend learning across the curriculum. So at this point, we have our second poll question for you. And that poll question is, how often do you do cross-curricular activities in your classroom, or program cross-curricular activities in your classroom? So if you wouldn't mind putting in a number on the scale, and we'll see where cross-curricular fits in with all of our participants. Just as a side note, it's something that I've really taken on personally, and I find it very rewarding for myself as well to blend things, because it helps me get through all of these expectations, which are a lot, as we all know. Okay, so we have some daily cross-curricular. Wow. We have a lot in the middle again, like happened with our first poll. And then we have, actually, we don't have any nevers, and we have 20% doing it twice, like on a level of 2. So that's awesome. Wow. So these resources you will really like, because, and the long range plans, because there are a lot of suggestions for cross-curricular integration.
Well, thank you very much, Gail. And we're going to show this this same visual that you've seen in Francesca's part again, and you might wonder why it's only grade 4. So we've cut it out here because the presentation from now until the end of the formal part of our presenting will give you examples from the long range plans, which can help you better understand how the long range plans are structured. So the traditional approach would have concentrated on the content strands, since obviously the A strand didn't exist. So you would have probably wondered as a teacher, what will I be teaching today in science? And then looked at the content areas, habitats and communities, light and sound, machines and their mechanisms, and rocks and minerals. And by the way, this is grade 4, but we will have examples for those of you who teach grade 5 or grade 6 in sequence, in chronological sequence later in our presentation today. So looking at now the top part, you'll notice that there's STEM investigation and communication skills at the very top. And STEM investigation and communication skills, there's actually a lot to unpack in that A1 strand, including 3 separate processes. So earlier you saw the third of 3 processes, which was the engineering design process, but there are also within A1, there are actually 2 other processes, being the the process dealing with scientific research, and I'm still on A1, and also the experiential component, or scientific experiment process, experimentation process. So that's all within A1, along with safety, and I believe it's communication. So those are all within A1. And then there's A2, which is coding and emerging technologies. And thirdly, we have applications, connections, and contributions, which is another substrand all its own. And so I'm insisting on this because this has now become the starting point. So you really want to be starting on which one of these three types of investigation, inquiry, coding, or applications do I want to start my program with, and then pick the contents which will go along. So I thought it was important to insist on that section. And now if we can just go on to the next slide, which deals with one of the three processes that I just mentioned, which is the scientific experimentation process. And if you start from that, you might think of, well, what could be the activity that I would do with my students? And we have an example for you in the long range plans. You can actually find it, I believe it's in November, under the long range plans. And it's called How Were the Great Pyramids Built? And it actually, you'll see at the top, there are symbols. Now the symbols are significant, and they connect to specific expectations in the A strand. And so you can see first aid, you can see experimentation, and you can see the symbol there for, I believe it's the scientific experimentation process. So you might ask your students, how are the Great Pyramids built, do you think? And then you would get into an inquiry of the usefulness of machines, the utility of rocks, and STEM building within the classroom, which is where the experimentation comes in. So at this point, after giving students the opportunity to explore about the Great Pyramids, you might ask them to build a pyramid in class. What a beautiful challenge, with paper cups, cardboard, marshmallows perhaps, or toothpicks, or any other materials that you might decide to use. So that's one example of sort of the flow that the writers went through in developing these suggestions for you. And you'll probably find different suggestions that you can apply in your classroom.
All right, so now that you've kind of been given an overview of the long range plans by Gail, Nilu, and Ian, I'm going to give you a sneak peek into the curriculum resources. So once again, this is available on the SciTech website. There's a section that says curriculum resources that will soon be available at the end of this month. So check it out then. But you will see them organized into different lessons. So when you click on curriculum resources, they'll be organized by grade, and then there'll be 4 to 5 different learning experiences for each grade level focused on a strand. So the one I'm going to focus on right now is the one of the grade 4 learning experiences, which focuses on pollinators and creating sustainable spaces. So this can be used as part of the Habitats and Communities unit. So the goal here was to have students develop their knowledge of pollinators, specifically bees, and the role in our ecosystems. Before I continue, someone did ask a question about Indigenous resources. So this resource, the grade 4 learning experiences, does include a link to lessons that relate to Indigenous culture in relation to pollination. So that will be available in the grade 4 learning experiences section. Okay, so moving on. I will let you skim through this on your own, just it's very wordy. But these are the specific expectations that the lesson or experience will cover. So once again, this is just one lesson or one activity from all the learning experiences that kind of form into a unit. As you see below, you'll see scientific experimentation, communication, and coding and emerging technologies. And these are from Strand A, and they will be integrated in this lesson. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A as I move on to the activities. So the learning goals for this activity is through the pollination. Students will follow the mentioned success criteria. All this information will be available in the lesson plans that will be posted online. So this is all accessible for you. Okay, so to the activities. So once again, the goal of this lesson is for students to learn about the pollination process of a bee and then simulate that process in one of the following ways. So many of the learning experiences that are posted will share different versions of activities that you can choose from to best suit your classroom and the resources that are available to you. So for example, option 1 is a no tech option. So if you don't have access to technology in your classroom, you can use craft materials, create a bee, and then dip it in colored powder that will show students how the pollen transfers. The second option is a low tech option, which is the use of Scratch, and students will use the Scratch to code the actions of the pollinator as it gathers the pollen. And then the absolute last is option 3, that is the high tech. So for example, if your school has access to Spheros, there is a lesson included where you can encourage students to code a Sphero to travel to different flowers that you can put on the floor. And as it travels to each flower, you can code it to change colors to show that it's taking pollen from one and it's moving around throughout. So as you can see, there are different options to help you adjust to your student needs, and it's very flexible and adaptable. There's also extension ideas included in the lessons as well. So in terms of assessment, because we know that is also very important, you can provide prompting questions throughout the experience. So as students are talking about or working through the activities or the lessons, you can talk about, what makes pollinators so good at their job? What kind of adaptations do they need to do this work? And then at the end, you can also do an assessment of learning in terms of assessing the pollination process. You can also provide an exit ticket just as a quick check-in to see if they understand the pollination process. So once again, this is one example of a lesson. The other lessons or experiences do kind of follow along to create somewhat of a lesson. So you can take what you need and use from there. At the same time, we have to, of course, ensure our lessons are inclusive and celebrate the diversity in our classroom. So that being said, this can be done by talking to students and thinking about their lived experiences and inviting those discussions, such as gardening, maybe farming back home in terms of where they're from. Maybe they experience something related to that. And on the other side, we can look at the use of assistive technology. Before I pass it on to Tanya, I did want to mention that the curriculum resources include all the links to the resources that have been used for the learning experiences. So along with the cross-curricular, connections and much more. So all this is provided to you. Everything I shared on the screen will be formatted in a document that you can browse through and take and kind of pick out what you'd like to apply. Now I'm going to pass it on to Tanya, who will share a sample lesson for grade 5.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Manpreet. That was such a good lesson. Okay, so for grade 5, I chose to take a look at sort of more of a holistic view of the resources. So as Manpreet said, for each unit, there are like 5 different lessons, and I'm just going to kind of show you some of the main components of those lessons. For this, I chose to do Strand E, which is conservation of energy and resources. And that was just because I think that's probably the most important strand for grade 5, but it's also one that can feel a little intimidating or overwhelming. So I wanted to take a look at some of the things that you could use in order to teach this effectively. One of the things that you'll notice, I obviously don't expect you to read this, but in the long range plan, all of the specific expectations are at the top. And then here we can see over on the left-hand side, it says that this particular unit is to be covered in April, May, and June. So that's purposeful, right? So we've really thought about when these lessons would be most effective. And that's just because with conservation of energy and resources, you really want it to be springtime, so it is conducive to going outside and enjoying the land. I read a quote actually just yesterday, which I thought was beautiful, and it was from David Sobel, and he just said, "We need to allow children to love the earth before we ask them to save it," which I thought was very cool. So I think it's important for us to make sure that we do some land-based learning and get kids to really love the earth before we even dive into this unit. So those are the long range plans, and connecting to the long range plans will be these curriculum resources. So as Manpreet said, in the long range plan, we're going to have links that will just take sort of the skeleton ideas that are available in the long range plans, and then you'll be able to click the link if it's something that tweaks your interest or looks, you know, kind of fun. Click the link, and then that will take you to more of a fully developed lesson plan so that you'll be able to incorporate that in your class. Each lesson plan comes with an overview of the learning experiences. Well, in this case, this is the overview of all 5 learning experiences, but then every lesson also has some learning goals so that you and your students will know exactly what it is that you're going to be learning in that lesson. Okay, so one of the things that I really loved about this whole unit is that every lesson started with one of these images. It's a what do you notice and what do you wonder image. Now, if I was the teacher, I would probably post one of these on a Jamboard and then get all kids to put some sticky notes around the image, one sticky note telling what they notice, and then another sticky note about what they wonder. Now, when I do those kinds of activities with kids, I always make it optional whether or not they put their name on the sticky note, but it's not optional whether or not they actually put on a sticky note. And that just allows you to get the voices of all the kids in the class and get them all really thinking, as opposed to a typical classroom discussion where you might get sort of your 4 or 5 most confident kids sharing their ideas. This way it allows all kids to really think deeply and have some ownership about sharing their ideas with the class. But allowing them the option of putting their name on it makes it a little bit less risky. So even the shy kids tend to share their thinking. Now, what I also liked is that almost every lesson has some videos included. So it's nice to have all the videos that you need for your lesson that have been vetted. And they're just really good videos. That most of them include pre and post discussion questions. And those that don't, you could use sort of a generic sort of KWL chart or whatever, but it is just really nice to have all of those resources compiled and that you know that they're appropriate for your class and relate to the actual expectations. So it's nice to have those in there as well. Okay, and I noticed in the chat, somebody had mentioned about the Indigenous resources. This particular unit does include one of my favorite resources for talking about Indigenous thinking and ways of knowing, and that is called the Resilience Project. Now, if you haven't heard of the Resilience Project, it's a collection of 50 different artworks created by Canadian Indigenous women, and they span a wide range of topics and themes. But one thing that I really like is that some of the images relate to climate change, or in this case, pollution. So with Strand A, as Ian had mentioned, there are 3 different components, right? So A1 is sort of your STEM, and then A2 is coding, and then sort of the one that doesn't get as much airplay is A3, which is the applications, connections, and contributions. But this is totally new to us. So this wasn't in the old curriculum. So it's something that's really important for us to address too, is really taking a look at Indigenous ways of knowing and how sort of those natural scientists came to be aware of different things. So I really like this image for getting kids to think about climate change and pollution and how that would affect different communities and different animals. Okay, and as Manpreet showed, I also really love that the coding resources have the 3 different options: no tech, low tech, or high tech. I also love that you can pick the one that just feels best to you. So in this case, because I really love Minecraft, I would probably choose option 3. However, in Manpreet's example, I kind of love the idea of dipping some pipe cleaners in colored powder. So I would have probably chosen the no tech option. So just because you have tech available to you doesn't necessarily mean that that is the option that you would have to choose. It's really about your personal preference and what you think you and your kids would get the most out of. And then finally, when it comes to assessment, like Manpreet said, what I really also like about the curriculum resources is that they do focus on conversations and observations. So when we're talking about that triangulation of data, they're not just focusing on products. So you have lots of different opportunities where you can assess your students' learning, and it's not just about what they produce for you or what tests they take or anything like that. Now, that being said, they do give you some more like formal assessment opportunities like the single point mastery rubric, but it's not necessarily something that you would have to use. Instead, they give you some suggestions for how you would assess and use sort of that formative assessment, which we know is way more powerful than the summative anyway.
Okay, thank you so much, Tanya and Manpreet, for doing the grade 4 and 5 examples and talking about the long range plans. I will say grade 6 is very similar. So I'm just going to spend a few moments highlighting one of the learning experiences and then the long range plans. So for grade 6, just a brief overview of Model 1. So the first half of the year focuses on STEM projects related to biodiversity and how other strands such as flight, electricity, and space affect biodiversity. And that is embedded right into that is all your STEM A expectations as well. The second half of the year for grade 6 includes focus on STEM projects related to technology and how technology impacts biodiversity, flight, electricity, and space. And when you go on and you look at the long range plan, the flow is very nice for Model 1 as well. Model 2 is excellent as well if you're more would prefer to kind of do it in units. The first half of the year focused on STEM and Strand A related to biodiversity and electricity. And the second half of the year focuses on STEM, Strand A, and projects related to flight and space. So again, it's up to you, the teacher, to choose which model you would like. So the curriculum resource that I chose was one that was called Biodiversity and its Impact on Our Environment. And it's kind of excellently done as well with consequences of diminishing biodiversity. So this is a 4-part lesson or learning experience is what they call it. So you've got STEM activities such as designing and building a bee box. Students will code an animal classification game. They also learn, and this is the connections piece, is they learn about contributions of Black and Indigenous scientists and how the loss of biodiversity often impacts marginalized communities disproportionately. So students engage then in cross-curricular activities, such as creating PSAs and letters to government officials about what they've learned. That ties in some nice language expectations. There are also opportunities for outdoor education in this activity, such as games and community walks that are all explained right in the resource. There's also ready-to-use handouts, website and video links, experiential learning. There's tons of assessment strategies similar to what Tanya and Manpreet mentioned. Of course, safety considerations are embedded right in there. And also for this activity, there's 2 options: coding no tech or tech options. So again, you've got some lovely choices to choose from in this activity and learning experience. So I think you should be able to see the curriculum resources for all the junior grades blend really nicely in with the long range plans for each grade level. And they have lots to offer teachers and students. And I'll pass on the mic.
Sorry, I realized my mic was off. So we are at the end of our presentation. So we want to thank, we'd like to thank or extend our thanks to all these educators who contributed with the long range plans, the curriculum documents, and so forth. These were the long range, and then the curriculum resource educators. So that being said, also our coding writing team. That being said, we would like to, we want to just kind of take some time to answer some of your questions that you have posed in the Q&A and some that we're going through the chat. Once again, all of this is on the SciTech website for you to access. The top, there's headings for long range, and the curriculum resources, once again, will be available at the end of this month. So just keep a lookout for when they will be released. But the long range are available. They're available in PDF and Word. The great thing about Word is that you can edit them in terms of take out parts you don't want to, you might not want to use in the classroom, and so forth.
So we've been monitoring chat, and there was one question from Rachel that we've kind of attempted to answer in writing about teachers who happen to teach 2 grades, and you know that's a hard question. And I'm wondering if there's anything from the panelists that might be helpful to someone who actually teaches, for example, grade 4 and 5, or 5 and 6.
Sure, Ian, I can speak to that because in the long range plans, there is a section, I believe it's in the overview for each grade, that talks about which strands would work best together for the year. So if you were teaching grade 4 and 5, it gives you some ideas of which strands to kind of do your STEM with that would complement each other. There's also a suggestion for 3-4, for 4-5, for 5-6, and for 6-7, I believe, just to cover. Now, if you're 4-5-6, I don't think we mentioned that, but that would be a tricky one for sure. But again, the idea is to kind of complement the strands and try and pull them together as best you can. I hope that helped.
We've had a few questions this evening too about our ESL students and accommodated students through the resources and where there's support for that. In the curriculum resources that will be posted at the end of the month, you will find in those areas there's a section sort of devoted to how to differentiate that learning experience, what accommodations you can make. We really tried our best in the resources to consider all learners in the classroom and create these resources that are going to work for all students in the class. So they are differentiated, and that's why you'll see like how Manpreet and my other partners have shared. That's why we consider different options for teaching coding, right, from low tech to high tech, so we can reach all those students and all those learners.
There were a couple of questions regarding Manpreet's resource section. One, Manpreet, was from Jody, where she said, does the resource provide the exit ticket and the described tasks? I guess the question is, are the actual tools, the printable tools, provided in the resources that you drafted?
So in terms of the activity explanations, it's basically what you saw on the slide, the 3 activities. However, I don't believe the exit ticket questions are included because it was just an idea of a possibility that you can use. There is from what I remember, a rubric that you can utilize to assess the pollinator process. It's a very generic one, which you can edit and revise to kind of suit the activity. In terms of, I know someone asked about Scratch. There wasn't a specific Scratch lesson particular to the pollination process. So it would be a little bit more of if you're comfortable with Scratch, or if your students are comfortable with Scratch and the codes that are required to do that. The Spiro one, however, was a lesson that I was able to find. and the link is embedded in the resource page. So if you do have access to Sphero, then you can access that link, and that link will take you to the actual pollinator lesson with all the details for that. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Great. That would be up to Steo to answer. I'm answering Dana's question in the chat regarding future professional development. I don't know. I think you can ask Steo through the website that we quoted, and maybe they'll be interested with more PD.
There's
Yeah.
also a survey at the end, so perhaps that might be a space where you can, share those thoughts, and something for Steo to consider as well for the future. There's a lot of questions I'm noticing in regards to Scratch. If you're not comfortable with it, Scratch offers a lot of resources on their website in terms of pre-created lessons that can guide students in coding, not necessarily the pollinator process, but in general to become more familiar with Scratch. And there's also some teacher resources on there as well. So I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, to kind of explore that. That's what I used to kind of get comfortable using Scratch. I'm still not, as great as maybe some of my students, but once you get the hang of it, it's kind of pretty easy to follow along.
And to be clear on the board question, we're all from 6 different boards, and we would never answer a question regarding your board's expectations, let alone our board's expectations. We would probably ask our principals and even our superintendents to field that kind of question. So we're not going to go there about your board's expectations, but you can ask your principal, you can ask your departments. They're there for you, you and your questions about their expectations for you.
Now, that being said, I would, as a STEM coordinator, I always say that science is sort of the application of math. So is it cool for kids to learn about like rates and ratios? I guess, but is it more cool for them to learn about how those relate to things in our world, like how to, find the height of a tree, or how to find out the relation of the sizes of the planets or something like that? Absolutely. So I know it seems overwhelming, but sometimes if you just look at your science and your math and you kind of think about, okay, well, in science, I'm doing space, for example, and then thinking about, well, I'm also doing like rates and ratios, I could probably combine those and make it more of an application project, right, for my math class.
And as mentioned,
Go on, Manpreet.
as mentioned in the long range plans that were at the beginning of the presentation, you'll notice a whole column that's dedicated to different activities. So once again, our lessons have picked out a few of those, but at the end of the day, those are ideas for you to kind of use to help integrate, like Tanya said, into areas that you might not have thought you can make those connections as well. So definitely explore the different options there, because it kind of starts up your mind and thinking of, oh, okay, well, I can kind of connect this to language, or yeah, this makes sense, and I can connect it to what I'm doing in math. Or if you haven't started your next math unit, you can think about what math unit might go well with it, and vice versa. Also, just to quickly note that Science North is a website that we mentioned a lot in our resources, as well as Let's Talk Science. So they are awesome websites. They're also bilingual, so they're available in French as well.
So continuing with what Tanya said, like coding, what I was doing with my class last year was like giving them a project, because I was a homeroom for grade 3. What I was doing, like giving them a project, especially with Scratch, where you have repetition, like you need to repeat a code. So we can actually plan out a cross-curricular activity where you're giving, let's say, pollination as a topic. So you can go forward giving them repeat code. That's how cross-curricular can actually work. Like you can take the two concepts together. Like for me, that's what I'm going to do, like, because I teach maths and science both. So you can inculcate both those projects, and you can present, like you can make a STEM project just on the base of coding, how it works. Like just try out something. That's what coding is all about. Like we just need to be there. We just need to try.
And I think the key thing to take away too is that STEM is intentional, and it's in its name itself, like science, technology, engineering, and math. It's meant to be integrated, but where it makes sense. But it's never just, we're just going to throw these together and see what happens. It's thoughtful and planned ahead of time. And so you're going to connect subject areas and strands within a subject where you feel that it works for your students and what works for your program. I can say amongst this team here tonight, we all come from different boards that have a different structure to what subjects are taught and when, and by which teachers, right? So it's interesting to see how different boards and different schools adapt to that and make the changes and make these opportunities, possible. But it's I think overall the messaging here too is you're going to do what works best for your students and what works best for you as a classroom teacher, right? Junior is always tricky. You're covering so many subjects at the same time. So it's like, how can we benefit from this and give our students real life problem, like examples that they can solve and that are meaningful to them, and that piece too.
In the last two questions, there was one question that I hold dearly, which is about French. So some people here seem to have gotten the wrong week, or maybe they wanted to see it in English and in French. But next week on Monday, we'll have the primary French, primaire français, about the long range plans and the resources. And Tuesday will be the junior day. At same time, same channel, I guess I could say. So look forward to seeing you there. If you're Francophone, I'll be there both nights. Oh, and there's an intermediate. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned the intermediate. I'm not involved in it, but I believe it's later on in the week. Is it Wednesday, perhaps, team? And there's also an intermediate in English tomorrow.
Yeah, it's Monday is primary, Tuesday is junior, and Wednesday next week is intermediate.
Okay, so before we kind of sign off, we just want you to share something in the chat because I know there's so many ongoing questions as well. But we want you to share and know what additional supports do you think you need in order to feel more comfortable with the implementation of the new science and tech curriculum. So we'll just give you a quick minute to share time. I think that's all of us.
we did get one sort of answer to this, which was the additional PD. And I, for one, would love to give additional PD. It's just we're not offering that right now. But if Steo asks us, some of us would probably say yes. So yeah.
I like the point of the split grades for sure, because that's a tough one all the time. Tech, yes. Physical training, hands-on.
Mm-hmm. I taught so many split grades for so long, so I hear all those split grade friends out there.
Mm-hmm.
So in the time being, definitely refer to that column in the long range plan where it says like where those curricular connections align and where you can, like, it's funny, STEM and science, we talk so much about integration and cross-strand, cross-curricular, but why not cross-grade? Like there's many opportunities there too. And I know we've done many STEAM challenges and STEAM lessons too, where we've done them in kindergarten and we've done the exact same one in grade 8, right? And it's amazing what students will show you and what they'll do.
So we do have an answer about from Sheila Rhodes, who's who's been overseeing this beautiful project and who's our mentor in science, we could say. And Sheila has said that we received money for what we're rolling out today and talking to you about today, and not for something else at this point.
I'm seeing a lot of good stuff that you want to see, and it's never ending. And I think it's really nice to see all the different additional supports that you require, to see how we can kind of move further with it. I am going to kind of end here, and please do, if the survey allows, to share these on there, because I think they will be very meaningful to STAO in terms of maybe future PD or anything else. So I do want to thank everyone for taking this time in the evening to attend our webinar. We hope it was valuable. You're able to take something away from it, even regardless of all the questions and you know, the ongoing struggles we may have as teachers. But we kindly do ask to please complete the survey before you leave tonight. And yeah, thank you very much once again. Thank you all presenters, and have a good night.
Just
Sorry, go
Vishanti,
ahead, Ian.
yeah, just a quick question about the French webinar. It is the same. So don't, if you've understood everything, you know how to find everything, the webinar will be very, very similar. So I wouldn't attend again unless you need to, because some parts escaped you because of perhaps language barrier. So you can come again, you're welcome, but it will be the same content.